The sun hung low over the endless plains, turning the sky a bruised gold as the Whitmore wagon train creaked westward. Dust rose behind the line of wagons like smoke from a dying fire. Among them rode Clara Whitmore, a young woman of 19, her bonnet shading eyes the color of summer sky. She sat beside her father, Reverend Whitmore, clutching her mother's worn Bible to her chest. They had left everything behind in Missouri, their home, their church, their friends, chasing the promise of a new life in Texas territory. But Clara felt a constant unease as though the land itself was watching. Every whisper of wind across the prairie grass sounded like a warning. For weeks there had been rumors. Travelers spoke of Comanche war parties haunting the trails, swift and merciless as ghosts. The men kept their rifles loaded, and the women prayed nightly by firelight. Clara had never seen an Indian before, only heard stories told in frightened whispers. Tales of raids, kidnappings and blood. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, the train made camp by a shallow creek. The women prepared supper while the men circled the wagons for safety. Clara went to fetch water, her skirts brushing the tall grass. The prairie was beautiful in its silence, until that silence broke. A shrill cry split the air, followed by the thunder of hooves. The ground trembled beneath her feet. When she turned, she saw them. Riders bursting over the ridge, painted faces fierce under feathered headdresses, spears gleaming like lightning. The Comanche had come. The camp erupted in chaos. Men shouted, women screamed, children scattered like startled birds. Clara dropped her bucket and ran, but her foot caught on a root and she fell hard onto the earth. Around her, flames licked at wagon canvas as arrows ignited the night. Her father's voice roared her name, then was drowned by gunfire. A hand seized her arm, strong as iron. She twisted and screamed, but the warrior towering over her did not strike. His face was streaked in red paint, his dark eyes calm and unreadable. He barked words she couldn't understand, slinging her effortlessly onto the back of his horse. The world blurred as they galloped away from the burning camp. The night swallowed everything, the screams, the fire, her family. Clara clung to the horse's mane, tears streaming down her face, too stunned even to pray. They rode for hours beneath a sky thick with stars. The air grew colder, and exhaustion pulled at her like chains. When the warrior finally slowed his horse, she saw they were deep in a canyon, hidden, silent, unreachable. She was shoved from the horse, but not harmed. The warrior gestured for her to sit near the fire. His companions laughed and spoke in their strange language, their faces illuminated by flickering light. One of them offered her water in a gourd. She hesitated, then drank, the dryness in her throat unbearable. When the others drifted to sleep, she looked around the camp. The painted horses, the weapons, the skins stretched to dry. The warrior who had taken her sat apart from the others, sharpening his knife under the moon. He glanced toward her once, not cruelly, but with a quiet curiosity. Clara pulled her shawl tighter and whispered a prayer into the night. She didn't know if her family lived or if she'd ever see another white face again. All she knew was that she was a captive in a wild and foreign world. The land around her stretched wide and endless, more beautiful and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Somewhere in the shadows of the canyon, a coyote howled, and Clara realized that the girl she had been was gone. What waited ahead was a journey she had never dreamed of, one that would test her faith, her courage, and the very meaning of love. The frontier had claimed her. Dawn crept across the canyon like a timid visitor, soft light spilling over the sleeping camp. Clara awoke to the smell of smoke and leather, her body sore from the rough ground. For a moment she forgot where she was, until she saw the painted warriors and the tethered horses. The horror of the previous night came flooding back. Her father, her mother, the wagons on fire, the screams. She pressed her trembling hands to her mouth to keep from crying out. Her heart beat so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She had no idea if anyone else had survived the raid. She wanted to run, but one look at the armed men told her it was useless. Even if she escaped the canyon, the prairie stretched for miles. Empty, wild, merciless. The warrior who had taken her, tall, broad-shouldered, with black hair bound in leather, approached her now. He carried a wooden bowl of food, roasted meat and something that smelled faintly of herbs. When she didn't move, he crouched in front of her and said a single word, slowly. Firmly, "Eat." His voice was deep but not unkind. Clara shook her head, her eyes full of defiance and fear. The warrior sighed and set the bowl down beside her before walking away. Later that morning, the camp stirred to life. Women with long braids and painted faces tended fires. Children ran laughing through the dust, and men cleaned weapons or prepared horses. It shocked Clara, the strange normalcy of it all. This was not a savage horde. It was a village, a living world with its own rhythm and order. Then came a sound like thunder. Drums. The warriors gathered in a wide circle. From a tent of animal hides emerged an older man with streaks of white in his hair and a chest covered in beads. His presence commanded silence. Clara realized he must be the chief. The warrior who had captured her stepped forward and spoke rapidly in the Comanche tongue. The others watched, murmuring as he gestured toward her. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear, firm, respectful, serious. The chief's eyes turned toward Clara, sharp and assessing as though weighing her soul. Finally, the old man raised a hand for silence. He spoke a few solemn words, and the crowd reacted with nods and murmurs. The decision, whatever it was, had been made. Two women came to Clara and lifted her gently but firmly to her feet. She tried to pull away, but their grip was strong. They led her toward the stream at the edge of camp, where they began to wash her face and hair, combing out the dirt with carved bone combs. She trembled, confused, muttering prayers. "What are you doing?" "Please, please let me go," she whispered. But the women only smiled faintly and continued their work. One of them pointed to her chest and said, "Toka." The name struck Clara like a spark of fear. She recognized it, the warrior's name. When they brought her back to the camp, the drums started again. The people had gathered in a circle, and in the center stood Toka, the man who had taken her. His expression was unreadable, neither cruel nor tender, but full of gravity. The chief spoke in a loud voice, gesturing between them. Clara's stomach twisted as realization dawned. They weren't preparing her for death. They were preparing her for marriage. Her voice broke as she cried out, "No! No, I can't." But no one understood her words. Toka stepped forward and held out his hand, palm up, a gesture of peace, perhaps of claim. Around them, the tribe began to chant, their voices blending with the wind that swept across the canyon. Clara's tears fell silently as she felt the chief lay a necklace of beads around her neck. In the eyes of the Comanche, the ceremony was simple but sacred. She was now the wife of a warrior. To them, this was protection, not punishment. She was no longer a captive, she was Toka's woman, bound to him by the will of the tribe and the spirits. To Clara, it felt like a sentence she could never escape. Yet when she dared to look into Toka's dark, steady eyes, she saw something unexpected, restraint, even respect. He had every right to claim her then, yet he did not. Instead, he said in slow, halting English, "You, safe. No hurt." It was the first kindness she had heard since the raid. Still trembling, Clara realized that her life had changed forever. She had crossed a threshold between two worlds, one that could never be undone. And though she did not yet know it, this moment of fear and confusion would one day become the beginning of her awakening. That evening, the Comanche camp came alive with drums and smoke. Fires burned bright under the rising moon, casting long shadows across the canyon walls. To Clara, the sound of the drums felt like the pounding of her own frightened heart. Every beat echoed her terror. Every chant reminded her she was far from everything she had ever known. She sat near one of the fires, her wrists no longer bound, though freedom was an illusion. Around her, women painted one another's faces with red and white clay, laughter mingling with the crackle of the flames. The same women who had washed her earlier now brushed her hair smooth and placed a string of turquoise beads around her neck. Clara's hands trembled as they worked. "Please," she whispered, not sure if they understood. "I don't want this." One of the women, older, kind-eyed, touched Clara's cheek gently and said something in Comanche, her tone soft. Clara caught only one word, "Toka." Then the woman pointed to her own heart and smiled. The gesture confused her even more. At the center of camp, Toka stood before the chief and the medicine man. He wore a deerskin tunic decorated with feathers and bone beads, his long hair braided down his back. He looked every inch the warrior, proud, silent, commanding. Clara had never seen eyes so dark, so steady, and yet so impossible to read. The ceremony began. The medicine man chanted words that Clara could not understand, raising a staff wrapped in eagle feathers toward the sky. The flames seemed to answer, leaping higher as the drums deepened their rhythm. Two women led Clara forward, their hands gentle but firm, until she stood across from Toka in the circle of firelight. She felt her knees weaken. This couldn't be real. Somewhere out there, her father might still be alive, searching for her. If only she could run. But every exit was guarded, and the warriors watched her with unblinking eyes. The medicine man sprinkled sacred herbs into the flames, sending up a trail of white smoke that curled into the night sky. He spoke solemnly, then placed two objects in Toka's hands, a knife and a small pouch. Toka sliced his palm and pressed it to Clara's, guiding her hand with surprising gentleness. She gasped at the contact, warm, firm, and strangely tender. Blood mingled between their palms before the medicine man bound their hands together with a leather cord. The chant rose louder, fierce and wild, echoing against the canyon walls. When the cord was tied, the crowd cheered. It was done. Clara stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't understand their words, but she knew what the ritual meant. She was his wife now, not by choice, but by tribal law, by blood, by the will of forces she couldn't fight. Toka looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time she saw something like hesitation flicker in his eyes. He reached out, brushed his fingers along the beads at her throat, then lowered his hand. "You, safe," he said quietly in broken English. "Toka, no hurt?" His words were a fragile mercy, a bridge between fear and the unknown. That night, when the fires dimmed and the camp grew still, he led her to his lodge, a small shelter made of hides and branches. She expected violence, expected him to claim what the tribe had already declared his. But Toka simply gestured for her to sit and handed her a blanket. He sat near the doorway, his back to her, staring into the night. Clara lay down, every muscle tense, her heart pounding. Hours passed in silence. At some point, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into uneasy sleep, expecting at any moment to wake to a nightmare. When dawn came, she opened her eyes and saw him still sitting by the door, unmoving, keeping watch like a guardian. He had not touched her. Confusion swelled inside her chest, mingling with fear and a strange, reluctant gratitude. She didn't understand this man, nor his world, but she sensed there was something in him she hadn't seen before, something honorable. As the first light touched the canyon, Clara realized that this marriage was far more complicated than she had imagined. And though she still feared him, a part of her began to wonder if the man she called her captor might also be her protector. It was the beginning of something neither of them yet understood, and the fragile spark of an awakening that would change both their hearts forever. The days that followed were a blur of silence and survival. Clara woke each morning to the sound of horses snorting, women grinding corn, and the hum of a language she did not understand. The camp was alive, full of motion, color, and laughter, yet she felt like a ghost drifting among them. She rarely spoke. She rarely ate. The world she had known, green pastures, church bells, her mother's gentle voice, felt like a memory from another life. Now there was only the prairie, endless and wild, and the Comanche people who moved across it with effortless grace. Toka watched her from a distance. He never forced her to speak, never raised his hand against her. At first, she thought his restraint was just another form of control, a way to make her drop her guard. But as days turned into weeks, she began to notice something else: patience. Each morning he brought her food, sometimes roasted rabbit, sometimes corn cakes, sometimes strips of dried meat. He would set the bowl near her and step away without a word. If she refused to eat, he would simply shrug and walk off. But by the next meal, he would try again. Clara's hunger eventually won over pride. She began to nibble at the food, careful not to meet his gaze. Once when she did, she saw the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. It startled her, not cruel, not mocking, but real. Despite her fear, she couldn't help but notice the way the tribe treated her. The women never hurt her. Some even tried to teach her small words, names for fire, water, sun. The children followed her with wide eyes, fascinated by her pale skin and yellow hair. One little girl even brought her a carved wooden doll one afternoon and giggled when Clara thanked her softly. Still, Loneliness pressed on her like a weight. Each night she curled beneath her blanket inside Toka's lodge, listening to the low murmur of voices outside. Toka would return late, smelling of horses and smoke. He always kept to his side of the shelter. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night to see him sitting upright, sharpening his knife or simply staring into the fire. He looked dangerous, and yet, in those quiet moments, also lost. One afternoon, a group of young warriors returned from a hunt, shouting and laughing as they dragged a deer into camp, the air filled with excitement and the rich scent of roasting meat. Clara stood near the edge of the gathering, clutching her shawl tight. She saw how Toka joined in the celebration, smiling, talking, his presence commanding but calm, a warrior, proud and feared, yet not cruel. Later that evening, as the tribe feasted, a young Comanche man approached her. His eyes gleamed with curiosity, his words teasing. When he reached for her hair, Toka appeared in an instant. His hand shot out, gripping the man's wrist with quiet fury. The camp went still. A single word from Toka, low and sharp, sent the man stumbling back. No one else dared approach her after that. Clara's heart pounded. For the first time she realized that Toka's claim on her was not about power, it was about protection. That night, when he handed her a bowl of food, she looked at him and whispered, "Thank you." He blinked, surprised by the sound of her voice. Then softly he repeated her words, "Thank you." His accent was rough, but the effort warmed something deep inside her chest. In that moment, something shifted. Small, fragile, but real. The fear that had once chained her heart began to crack. She still longed for home, for her family. But the hatred she'd carried for this man began to blur into something she couldn't name. She was still a stranger in this world, still a prisoner of fate, yet each passing day, the line between captor and companion grew thinner, and though she couldn't admit it yet, Clara had started to see that the wild frontier might not just be a place of danger, but also the beginning of a different kind of freedom. The season began to change. Mornings grew softer, the prairie grass shimmered gold under a rising sun, and Clara found herself adapting, and slowly, unwillingly, but undeniably. What had once been a prison had become a strange rhythm she could almost follow. She knew when the women went to fetch water, when the men rode out for the hunt, when the fires were lit. She had learned a few words now: water, fire, eat, sleep. The children helped her, laughing when she mispronounced them, clapping when she got one right. Toka seemed to notice. He would point to things and speak the Comanche word, waiting for her to repeat it. His patience never wavered, even when she stumbled. It became a quiet ritual between them. Sometimes they said nothing at all. Only the wind spoke for them, but the silence no longer felt sharp and heavy. One afternoon, Clara was sitting by the creek washing her hands when she saw Toka approach. He knelt beside her, holding out a carved piece of bone shaped like a bird. "For you," he said. Clara looked at it, surprised. "What is it?" He smiled faintly. "Freedom bird," he said in broken English. "Fly far, always come back." The gift was simple, but the meaning struck deep. She turned it over in her hands, touched by the thought that he had made it for her. That night, under a sky crowded with stars, she gathered her courage and asked the question that had been haunting her. "Why, me?" He was sitting across the fire, sharpening an arrowhead. When he looked up, the firelight painted his features in bronze and gold. He seemed to understand her question, even if her words were not perfect. He set the arrow aside and began to speak slowly, his English rough but deliberate. "My father, white men kill him, soldiers." His gaze drifted to the flames. "They take land, take horses, take everything. My mother die in cold." Clara's throat tightened. She had been told the Indians were ruthless savages, but in that moment she saw not a savage, only a man who had lost more than she could imagine. Toka continued, pointing toward the canyon walls. "This land, all that left. My people fight to keep it. You come, not your fault, but I take you because—" He paused, searching for the words. "Spirits say it, you bring peace." Clara didn't know what to say. The idea that the spirits could choose her, a frightened settler girl, for any purpose seemed absurd. Yet his sincerity was unmistakable. He truly believed it. For the first time she saw him not as her captor, but as a man bound by his own sense of destiny, his own code of honor. The wind stirred through the camp, carrying the scent of sage and smoke. Toka reached for a stick and drew a symbol in the dirt, a circle with 2 lines crossing in the center. Man, he said, pointing to one side. Woman, he pointed to the other. Then he touched the center. Together, strong. Clara felt a pang in her chest, a mixture of fear, confusion, and something else she didn't want to name. She nodded slightly, her voice a whisper. Strong, he smiled, the faintest curve of his lips, and the firelight caught in his eyes like gold. That night, lying on her blanket, Clara thought of his story, of loss and land and the cruel turns of fate that had brought them both to this place. She thought of her father's sermons about forgiveness and humanity, and she wondered what he would say if he could see her now, sitting across a fire from the man she had once believed her enemy. When she closed her eyes, she realized that for the first time since her capture, she was no longer praying for escape. She was praying for understanding, and though she did not yet realize it, that prayer would soon lead her to the edge of something deeper, something she had never known before. Compassion, trust, and the fragile beginning of love. The first cold winds swept across the plains carrying dust and the scent of rain. The Comanche camp prepared for the changing season, drying meat, patching hides, storing food. Clara helped where she could, though her hands were still clumsy and her strength fading. She had been feeling weak for days, but she told no one. She didn't want to seem helpless again, not after finally earning small respect among the women. By the 3rd night, her body began to tremble uncontrollably. Sweat soaked her hair and every breath burned her lungs. When she tried to rise from her blanket, the world tilted and went black. She didn't know how long she slept, or dreamed. She saw flashes of fire, faces that weren't there, her mother's voice calling her name. Sometimes she thought she felt cool water on her lips, a hand brushing hair from her face. When she woke for real, the light was dim and golden. She was lying inside Toka's lodge. A fire burned low beside her, filling the space with warmth. Toka sat close, grinding herbs in a small bowl. His brow was furrowed, his eyes shadowed with worry. When he saw her stir, he said softly, "You live." Clara's throat felt dry as sand. "What happened?" she whispered. He handed her a small cup carved from bone. "Drink medicine." The taste was bitter, but she obeyed. As she drank, her gaze met his. There was no distance in that look, no barrier of words or culture, only concern. "You were very sick," he said slowly, struggling with English. "Fever, 3 days, 3 days." The thought made her shiver. "You stayed?" Toka hesitated, then nodded once. "I stay." She looked at him, really looked, and saw exhaustion in his face, dark circles beneath his eyes. He hadn't slept much. She thought of all the times she'd seen him keeping watch outside the lodge. Silent as stone. He had done it again, not out of duty this time, but out of something quieter, deeper. "Why?" she asked, voice trembling. He tilted his head, not understanding. "Why help me?" He set the bowl aside and thought for a long moment. Then he touched his chest. "My wife," he said simply. "You mine. I protect." The words should have angered her, that possessive claim. But his tone held no arrogance, only conviction. It wasn't ownership he meant, she realized. It was responsibility. She reached out before she could stop herself, her fingers brushing his hand where it rested on his knee. His skin was warm, rough from work, and the contact startled them both. He froze, eyes locked on hers. For a moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, he turned his hand and let his fingers curl around hers. The silence between them thickened. Not with fear this time, but with something tender and unspoken. Outside, the wind moaned through the canyon, rattling the hides of the lodge. Toka squeezed her hand gently before pulling away. "Rest," he said. "You strong again soon." That night, Clara drifted in and out of sleep. Each time she opened her eyes, she saw Toka near the fire, watching over her. Once she saw him bow his head and whisper to the flames, perhaps a prayer, though she couldn't understand the words. When she finally woke the next morning, her fever had broken. The air felt crisp and her body, though weak, was calm. Toka was asleep beside the door, his knife in hand, as if guarding her even in his dreams. Clara studied his face in the pale dawn light. The lines of strength she had once feared now seemed different, not cruel but protective. For the first time, she noticed the small scar near his temple, the faint white mark across his hand, the quiet steadiness in the way he breathed. Something inside her softened. She thought of the life she had lost, the world that would never welcome her again, and realized that in this strange place and among people she had once feared, she was beginning to feel something she hadn't in months. Safe. Her fingers brushed the small carved bird he had given her. It rested beside her blanket, its wings open, ready to fly, and for the first time since her capture, Clara didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like someone awakening, to her strength, to her heart, and to the man who had refused to let her die. The fever left Clara's body, but not her mind. In the days that followed, she moved through the camp like someone living two lives, one in the present, one in the past. When she watched the women weaving or pounding maize, she saw her mother's hands sewing by lamplight. When the children played near the stream, she thought of her younger brother, Samuel, who used to chase fireflies through the fields. And when Toka rode out with the warriors at dawn, strong and certain, she remembered her father's sermons about God's will and wondered what he would think of her now, the daughter who had become a wife to a Comanche. The thought filled her with guilt so deep it ached. Toka had saved her life. He had cared for her when no one else could. He spoke to her gently, never touched her without her consent, and yet she was supposed to hate him. She was supposed to dream only of escape, of finding her way back to the people who spoke her language and shared her faith. But what if she no longer belonged there? Each night when Toka returned from hunting, the campfire became their meeting place. They didn't share many words, only fragments of language, gestures, glances. But somehow it was enough. She found herself waiting for him, listening for his footsteps. One evening she tried to busy herself near the fire while the others ate. Toka sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. He handed her a bowl of stew and nodded, his small smile reassuring. "Eat," he said softly. She obeyed, though her hands trembled. After a while she asked quietly, "Your wife before me? You have one?" He shook his head. "No, you first." She looked away, her cheeks burning. The simplicity of his answer made her heart flutter and sink at once. He spoke of her as if she were his choice, his first, his only. But she knew the truth. The tribe had chosen her, not him. Later that night, unable to sleep, Clara stepped outside the lodge. The moon hung pale and low, and the prairie stretched endless beneath it. She felt the pull of two worlds, the one she had lost and the one that was slowly claiming her. Behind her, Toka emerged silently, barefoot and bare-chested, the firelight from the lodge glinting off his bronze skin. He said nothing, only stood beside her, following her gaze toward the horizon. "You think of your people," he said after a while. She nodded. "Yes, I think of home." He studied her face for a long time before answering. "Your heart, half there, half here." His words struck her with painful accuracy. She wrapped her arms around herself, unsure how to answer. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted. He was quiet for a long time, then said softly, "You strong woman. Sky big, enough for both hearts." She turned toward him, startled by his gentleness. "How do you always know what to say?" He smiled faintly. "I listen." For a long time they stood in silence, the wind whispering through the grass. When a cold gust made her shiver, he reached for his cloak and draped it over her shoulders. His hand brushed her cheek, just a fleeting touch, but it sent a rush of warmth through her chest that frightened her more than any battle cry ever could. Clara stepped back, confused, ashamed of her own reaction. "I can't," she began, but the words failed. Toka didn't move closer. He only nodded once, as if he understood. "Sleep," he said softly. Tomorrow, sunrise again. She returned to the lodge alone, her heart pounding. Lying under her blanket, she pressed her hand to the spot where his fingers had touched her face. It shouldn't have meant anything. It should have disgusted her. But it hadn't. She didn't know if she was losing her mind or simply losing her heart. Outside, she heard him hum softly to his horse, the sound low and mournful. It lulled her into sleep filled with dreams and of running water, of wildflowers, of hands that reached across two worlds. And when she woke, she realized with dread and wonder that she no longer feared Toka. She feared herself. The morning came like any other. A pale sun, the smell of smoke and coffee, the chatter of children. Clara had begun to find comfort in the rhythm of the camp. She helped the women grind maize, fetched water, and even laughed once when a small boy brought her a frog as a gift. But that fragile peace shattered before noon. It began with a sound, faint at first, like thunder rolling far away. The Comanche warriors paused, heads lifting, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. Clara followed their gaze and saw a line of dust rising in the distance. Horses, many of them. Toka's voice cut through the murmurs. Soldiers. In an instant the calm dissolved. Women gathered the children, pulling them toward the ravine. Warriors ran for their weapons. The air filled with the sharp scent of fear and fire. Clara's heart stopped. Soldiers, white men, her people. Her first thought was of salvation. Her second was dread. Toka turned to her. "You stay," he said, gripping her arm. His eyes were fierce, protective. "Hide," she shook her head. "They won't hurt me. They'll help me." He frowned, disbelief flickering across his face. "Help? They kill. All they see, enemy. They'll take me home," she cried. "I can talk to them, explain." Before she could finish, the first rifle shot cracked across the plain. The world erupted in chaos. Horses screamed. Children wailed. Warriors leapt onto their mounts and charged toward the attackers. Smoke and dust rose together, swallowing everything in a haze of violence. Clara dropped to her knees, covering her head as bullets tore through the air. Through the storm of noise, she heard Toka shouting, his voice commanding, desperate. He was trying to hold the soldiers back, to shield the camp. She crawled toward him, crying his name. "Toka, stop! They're not—" Her words were drowned by another blast. The smell of blood filled her nose. A warrior fell beside her, his chest torn open. Clara screamed and stumbled to her feet. Suddenly a hand seized her arm, rough, familiar in its pale skin. "A soldier, miss! Thank God! You're alive!" he shouted, pulling her behind him. His uniform was streaked with dust, his face half hidden beneath his hat. "We'll get you out of here." She froze, staring up at him. His accent, his manner, he was one of hers. But everything in her resisted his touch. "Wait, stop! You're killing them!" she cried, trying to break free. He looked at her as if she were mad. "They're savages. They took you, didn't they? You're safe now." "No!" she shouted, twisting away. "They saved me." The soldier's eyes widened, confusion turning to disgust. "You've gone native," he muttered. "You don't even know who you are anymore." Before she could answer, a gunshot exploded nearby. Toka appeared from the smoke, charging on horseback. His hair whipped behind him, his face streaked with dirt and blood. He fired his rifle into the air, scattering the soldiers who surrounded Clara. "Toka!" she screamed. He reached for her, but the soldier beside her fired. The shot hit Toka in the shoulder. He reeled back, his horse bucking beneath him. Clara ran forward, shoving the soldier aside. "No!" she cried, catching Toka as he fell. Blood seeped through her fingers as she pressed against the wound. "Run!" he gasped. "Go! I won't leave you!" But before she could do anything, more soldiers surrounded them. Two grabbed her arms, dragging her away. "He's dying," one sneered. "You're coming home." Clara kicked and screamed, fighting them with all her strength. "No, let me go." "He's hurt!" Toka's eyes found hers, dark, pained, full of something unspoken. "Live," he whispered. Then his head dropped forward and they pulled her away. The soldiers threw her onto a wagon at the edge of the battlefield. She looked back one last time, saw the Comanche camp burning, the women crying, the warriors fallen. And among them, Toka's still form. Tears blurred her vision as the wagon lurched forward. She was being taken home, but home no longer felt like salvation. It felt like betrayal, and somewhere in her heart she knew. She had just lost the only man who had ever truly seen her. The wagon jolted over the rutted trail, every bounce jarring Clara's bruised body. The soldiers around her spoke in low voices, glancing at her as though she were some strange creature they'd rescued from a nightmare. To them, she was a victim. To her, she felt like a ghost. After hours of travel, they reached the outpost, a wooden fort surrounded by high walls, the stars just beginning to fade into dawn. The moment they arrived, the commanding officer, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes, approached her. "Miss Weston," he said carefully, studying her torn dress, the beads still around her neck. "You're safe now. We'll send word to your family back east. Safe." The word rang hollow. She nodded mutely as they guided her into a tent, offering blankets, broth, and clean clothes. The women of the fort fussed over her, whispering about that poor girl, but Clara felt detached, as if she were watching someone else's story unfold. That night, when she lay in a real bed for the first time in months, she couldn't sleep. The mattress felt too soft, the silence too loud. She could still smell the smoke from the Comanche fires, hear the distant hum of their songs, and worst of all, she could still see Toka, falling from his horse, blood on his chest, eyes full of love and warning. She pressed her face into the pillow and wept until dawn. Days passed. Her hair was trimmed, her wounds cleaned. They gave her new dresses, shoes, a bonnet. The woman in the mirror looked like the old Clara, but something inside her was gone. A preacher came to visit her, offering comfort. "You must thank the Lord for your deliverance, child. Those savages nearly destroyed your soul." Clara stared at him, her throat tightening. "They didn't destroy me," she whispered. "They saved me." The preacher blinked, taken aback. "You don't mean that." But she did. He crossed himself and left quickly, whispering to the others about her confusion. After that, people treated her differently, with pity, but also suspicion. Some soldiers avoided her gaze. Others looked at her with fascination, curiosity tinged with judgment. They didn't understand how a white woman could live among the Comanche and not hate them. Sometimes at night, Clara would walk to the edge of the fort and look out across the plains. The horizon seemed endless, but to her it was empty. The wind carried no songs, no laughter, no heartbeat but her own. Freedom, she realized, was supposed to feel light, but this freedom weighed on her like chains. One morning, a letter arrived from her father. The officer read it aloud since Clara couldn't bring herself to open it. "My dear daughter," it began, "our prayers have been answered. The Lord has returned you to us. Your ordeal is over. You must put it all behind you and come home." She folded the letter carefully and placed it aside. Come home. The words felt wrong now that evening. As the sun dipped below the hills, she sat near the fire, running her fingers over the beads that still hung around her neck, the ones Toka had tied there with his own hands. She remembered the warmth of his palm, the way he had whispered her name like it meant something sacred. A soldier approached her quietly. "Miss Weston," he said, clearing his throat. "We ride east tomorrow. The colonel says you'll come with us." She looked up slowly. "East," she repeated. "Back to the towns." "Yes, ma'am. Civilization." Clara smiled faintly, but it was a sad, tired smile. "Civilization," she echoed. "I wonder who decided which side of the river that begins on." The soldier frowned, not understanding, and left her alone. When the fire burned low, Clara lifted her face to the stars. Somewhere beyond those plains, the Comanche rode beneath the same sky. Maybe Toka was alive. Maybe he wasn't, but either way, her heart was still out there, wild, untamed, and lost. And though she would leave the frontier the next morning, she knew she would never truly return to the world she came from, because once a woman has been touched by a love born of fire and freedom, no cage of comfort can ever hold her again. The wagon train rattled eastward under a blazing sun, carrying Clara farther each day from the land that had remade her. The soldiers sang and laughed as they rode, eager to return to their outposts and families. To them, this journey was the end of a mission. To Clara, it felt like exile. Every sunrise brought a sharper ache. The memory of Toka's voice, the warmth of his hands, the way he had said her name as if it were something sacred. She wore his necklace still, hidden under her dress, its rough beads pressing against her heart. She told herself she was being foolish. He was gone. The soldiers said the Comanche camp had been destroyed. No one could have survived. But her heart refused to believe it. On the 5th night, they camped near a shallow river. The air was still and heavy, the prairie whispering softly in the dark. Clara slipped away from the fire, seeking a moment of peace by the water. She knelt to wash her hands and then froze. Across the river, half hidden among the cottonwoods, a shadow moved. A man on horseback, silent, watching, her breath caught in her throat. The horse stepped forward and moonlight fell across its rider. Her heart stopped. "Toka," she whispered. He looked thinner, his arm bound in a sling, but it was him, alive. His gaze found hers across the rippling water, and for a moment the world disappeared. She stood, trembling. "You're alive." He dismounted slowly, wincing with pain. "I look for you," he said quietly, his English halting but sure. Long way. Soldiers take you. Tears filled her eyes. They said you were dead. He shook his head once. I not die easy. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. Two souls from different worlds bound by something stronger than words. Then she stepped into the water. It was cold and fast, but she didn't care. Clara, a soldier's voice shouted behind her. Get back here. She turned. Torches flared along the bank. The men had seen them. Toka's horse stamped nervously. He looked at her, his face torn between longing and warning. You come, might they kill me? She shook her head. Then take me with you. His eyes widened. You sure? You never come back? I already can't go back, she said softly. Not to the woman I was. The soldiers were running now, their boots pounding the dirt. Toka reached out a hand across the current. Clara! Without thinking, she splashed forward, water dragging at her skirts. A bullet cracked past her ear. Another struck the water near her feet. She didn't stop. Toka spurred his horse forward into the stream, catching her just as she stumbled. He pulled her up behind him, wrapping one strong arm around her waist. The soldiers shouted. Gunfire lit the night. But the Comanche horse, wild and sure-footed, surged up the bank and into the open plains. Wind tore through Clara's hair as they rode. The sound of the soldiers faded behind them, swallowed by the endless prairie. Only when they reached a ridge and the stars widened above them did Toka slow the horse. He turned to look at her, his face full of wonder and disbelief. You choose me, he said quietly. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. I always did. I just didn't know it yet. He reached up and touched her cheek, his fingers trembling. Then no more fear. No more, she whispered. The moon bathed them in silver light. Around them stretched the untamed land, vast, free, eternal. And for the first time since the day she'd been taken, Clara felt truly at home, not because of where she was, but because of who she was with. Years later, the settlers would speak of a white woman who rode with the Comanche, a ghost of the frontier who vanished into the wind. But those who saw her, her head high, her dark hair unbound and the warrior at her side, said she did not look lost, she looked found.